to everybody joining us from around the world today. Welcome to this third annual John Innes Foundation lecture. I'm honored that we have such an eminent speaker for our lecture today in Professor Cynthia Rosenzweig, and I'm delighted that so many of you have joined us for this event. You are all warmly welcome. In a moment, I'll start the formal proceedings, but first, if you allow me, I'll just say a few words to introduce myself, the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development, and our sponsor, the John Innes Foundation. I'm Nitya Rao. I'm Professor of Gender and Development at the School of Global Development at the University of East Anglia. And in that role, I have been championing gender equality and women's empowerment and broader issues of social justice, particularly in contexts of climatic variability and economic precarity in both Africa and Asia. Those areas where climate change is likely to exacerbate gender inequality. I was also delighted to be appointed as the first director of the new Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development in 2020. The Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development is a new center of excellence which applies world-leading transdisciplinary research to pressing global problems. The institute harnesses complementary strengths across the Norwich Research Park and focuses on food security and sustainability, an internationally recognized research strength here in Norwich. The institute was launched in 2021 with generous funding from the John Innes Foundation, a UK-based charity which is passionate about the role of science has to play in creating the sustainable societies of the future. I would like to thank the John Innes Foundation for their financial support to the Institute and for their ongoing encouragement, advice, and wise counsel. I would like to thank Professor Cynthia Rosenzweig for honoring us today with her words. And I would also like to thank my team at the NISD and colleagues at the Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research for all the work that has gone into preparing today's event. This event is being recorded for those who are unable to be here present at this moment. Before proceeding, inviting Professor Cynthia, I would like to first introduce Professor David Maguire, the Vice Chancellor of the University of East Anglia. Professor Maguire joined UEA as Vice Chancellor and President in May this year. He has more than 25 years' experience in higher education, having worked at 8 universities in the UK and the USA, as well as prominent roles in the public and private sector. He has served as Vice Chancellor of the Universities of Greenwich, Dundee, and Sussex. Prior to joining UEA, David was interim principal at the Dyson Institute of Engineering and Technology. David's own research interests center on geographic information systems and higher education policy. He's the author of over 100 papers and 7 books. Thank you for hosting this lecture today, Professor Maguire. Unfortunately, Professor Maguire is also traveling, so we have a recorded message from him. Matt, if you can bring that on.
Thank you, Professor Rao, for your opening words. First, I apologise for joining you through a recorded message. I'm currently overseas and I don't have a connection with which I could be 100% confident of using for such an important event. Second, I'd like to echo Nitya's words of welcome to all of you joining this lecture, be that locally, nationally, or internationally. I greatly value your engagement. It is my pleasure and privilege to warmly welcome Professor Cynthia Rosenzweig to the University of East Anglia and to the Norwich Research Park. On behalf of the university and our local partners, I also congratulate Professor Rosenzweig on receipt of the 2022 World Food Prize. I will allow others more expert than me to introduce Professor Rosenzweig in detail, but I'm sure you'll agree with me that this is one of the most important areas of academic pursuit today. I'm also sure that Professor Rosenzweig will find a rapt audience and keen collaborators here in Norwich. As we celebrated in the most recent UK research exercise, environment, food and agriculture and international development are areas of world-leading research here at the UEA. Professor Rosenzweig's talk today is the third annual John Innes Foundation lecture. I would like to take this opportunity to again thank the John Innes Foundation for their generous support in establishing the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development and for all the important work that the Foundation does on campus. Thank you again, everyone, for attending today's lecture. I'm confident it will be a thought-provoking lecture and one that leads to necessary and important international collaboration in this really vital area.
Thank you. I would now next like to introduce our sponsor for today, Mr. Peter Innes, a chair of the John Innes Foundation. Peter Innes maintains an unbroken line of Innes family members who have been trustees of the John Innes Foundation for 100 years. Mr. Innes served in the British Army and then worked in the financial services sector in Hong Kong and Scotland. Now retired, Peter Innes has been a strong supporter of the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development from its inception through its development and now in its first 3 years of successful operation. Thank you, Mr. Innes.
Thank you, Nitya, for introducing me. And can I just add my welcome to David and to yours, to all of you who are listening in on this. Can I just explain a little bit more about the John Innes Foundation? It was set up as a charity by my ancestor, John Innes, over 100 years ago. And since our formation, it's supported cutting-edge research so that today we find ourselves in Norwich on a unique site globally for transdisciplinary science in the areas of environment, food, and agriculture. The Foundation believes that by supporting these research communities, we can address the most difficult challenges that the world faces. It is on this journey for a better future that we are delighted to be supporting the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development. And the reason that we are honoured to welcome the 2022 UN World Food Prize winner, Professor Cynthia Rosenzweig, to give the John Innes Foundation lecture today. In this critical decade for the climate, now is the time to change how our actions impact the future. The trustees of the Foundation are passionate about how science can bring healthy diets to all, rebuild flourishing ecosystems, and nurture the generations of tomorrow. So I'd like to thank Cynthia for honouring us today, and thank you too all for participating. It is going to be a great event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your words of encouragement as always. I would next like to introduce my co-organizer of today's lecture, Professor Robert Nicholls, who's the director of the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research here at UEA. Professor Nicholls has been the director of the Tyndall Centre since October 2019 and a member of the centre since its founding. Robert has studied coastal problems and solutions for over 30 years, focusing on how increases in sea level caused by climate change result in coastal erosion and flooding, and then how communities can adapt to these changes. Robert is one of the principal developers of the Dynamic Interactive Vulnerability Assessment, or DIVA model, used extensively in both research and policy development. Robert has been Web of Science highly cited researcher since 2019. He has published over 250 peer-reviewed papers, is the co-editor of 6 books and many articles and book chapters, including authorship of 5 assessment reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Thank you, Robert.
Hello, I'm Robert Nicholls, the Director of the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Cynthia Rosenzweig from the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies. Cynthia has been working really on the issue of climate change for most of her career, and she's done pioneering work on things like the effect of climate change on cities, or asking questions like how much can we attribute what we observe to climate change, leading pioneering work in those areas. But her major contribution has been in the area of agriculture and climate change. I met Cynthia on the international project funded by the US Environment Protection Agency, which was one of the first projects to really look globally at the effects of climate change across a number of sectors. And Cynthia was working on the agricultural component and doing pioneering modelling on what were the effects of climate change on agricultural yields and things like what was the likelihood of hungry people with these different sorts of scenarios. And from there, her work has continued to develop. She's led the AgMIP project, the Agricultural Model Intercomparison and Improvement project, and her work has been influential in more than 90 countries in terms of what we understand in climate risks for agriculture and what we can do about those risks. And in 2022, she was awarded the World Food Prize, which is essentially the Nobel Prize for agriculture. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce her and look forward to her lecture on climate change and sustainable food systems, pathways and partnerships.
Thank you so much, Robert, for also sharing your personal experiences of working with Cynthia. And we are missing you today. I know you are traveling and can't be here with us in person. I would now like to invite Professor Cynthia Rosenzweig to deliver her lecture. That there's a slight change in the title from what Robert just said. That's Fostering Resilient Food Systems in a Changing Climate. I would request you to please put any questions or comments that you have in the chat box as Cynthia delivers her lecture, and she'll be very happy to take questions at the end of the lecture. So we are hoping to also have a bit of a question and answer discussion session at the end. So thank you very much, Cynthia, and now we look forward to hearing you.
Hello from outside of New York City. I'm sorry I can't be there at the University of East Anglia and Norwich in person. But I want to thank Peter Innes and the John Innes Foundation and the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development. By chance, I put on my SDG pin. And whenever I put it on, I think we only have 7 more years to achieve those goals. And we all know what has happened in the interim and the challenges that we face, especially in regard to food security for the people of the world. So thank you so much to Peter Innes, to the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development, Nitya Rao, and and also for the wonderful introduction from my very longtime colleague Robert Nicholls. So it's great to be here virtually. So I'm going to share my screen and launch in, which I believe is should be right here. Good. And it seems that it is. So are we all set technically?
Looks great, Cynthia. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. So here we go. So I'm going to be sharing thoughts certainly about fostering resilient food systems in a changing climate. But I'm going to be doing that through the lens of what's happening really right now in the field of research and climate change, which in particular is the beginning of the 7th assessment report cycle of the IPCC. And I want to extend congratulations to the UK and our colleague Jim Ski, who is the chair of the new chair, really the incoming chair of the IPCC now. So the UK is playing a very important leadership role in the IPCC. But there's a lot of research challenges that we're facing that I want to share with the colleagues participating and listen in this lecture, to really see how can the research then really be working to provide the evidence base for decision making, as well as underlying fostering the resilient food systems in a changing climate, which in the end is what this is really the challenge of climate change is all about. So let's see if I can get this to advance, but it's not advancing. All right. I think I'm going to come in again. Hold on one second. I'm going to come in again, I think. Let's try again. I'll try this one. Yes. All right. This one is advancing. So the topics I'm going to cover first, what are the challenges of climate and conflict? This is where we are today. Then I want to dig into it's a bit of the weeds of how we analyze the effects of climate change on food and food security, and offer some suggestions for the AR7 food authors who will be gathering to assess this major challenge. Then I want to share methods and tools. And here's where AgMIP comes in, the Agricultural Model Intercomparison and Improvement Project, which is a worldwide network of over 1,000 researchers and modelers worldwide. Then, as we come to the furthering, how do we move forward now, given the challenges of where we are today? And this, I believe, very much involves breaking down silos. So I'm going to give examples, concrete examples, I think, of how in some of the AgMIP projects we're doing that, and I'm sure that this kind of integrated work is being done also at the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development, and then of course the Tyndall Center, where many climate change colleagues have been from the beginning of the research on climate change. And then up to the minute on to COP28 in Dubai. Some people probably in the audience are already already booking their tickets or have booked their tickets on hotels and are on the way to the Conference of the Parties. So let's turn to climate and conflict. Here we have the fundamental climate change conflict, where we are right now. So these are the three projections from the IPCC sixth assessment report in 2021. On the left, we have the simulated change. These are the global temperature rises from pre-industrial of 1.5 degrees. This is what the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Paris Agreement is aiming the world to. Then they fudged a little bit in the agreement and they said, well, 1.5 to 2 degrees C. But then on the right, we have simulated change at 4 degrees C global warming, and some of the really good work came out of the UK on the 4-degree world, saying, look, this was a few years ago. Look, we have to look at those higher end warmings as well. Of course, if you look at the land areas where the agricultural regions are, there's change even at all of these warming levels. But of course, this tremendous effort with the Paris Agreement is to the 1.5. However, the current government pledges will only put the world on track for roughly 3 degrees C warming in between the middle and the right. by the end of the century. And there is just even the latest analysis, which came today over the wire, new analysis of national climate plans, insufficient progress made so that COP28 must set the stage for immediate action. This urgency is becoming very real. But of course, these are static figures. But really, where we are now in terms of what's facing our agricultural regions around the world is what everyone now is now calling the climate overshoot. Because look, we have to be, I think, very clear-eyed about this. We're not going to be progressing to 1.5 degrees C and adapting to that. Instead, we're going to be following one of these curves, and unfortunately, we are on these are the overshoot curves for large overshoot in red, limited and temporary overshoot in orange. No overshoot is in green, and you can see the historical warming that we've already, gone up more than a degree Celsius. So, or just right around degree Celsius. That's where we are in the warming so far. So, research on resilient food systems has to now include dynamic adaptation and mitigation pathways urgently needed before we would do, okay, 1.5 or 2 or 4 or 3, right? But instead now we have to be thinking, what do we need to do on the way up to the peak warming? And then if we are able to, and we've certainly, everyone in the climate change who works on climate change around the world very much wants us to be dipping down. But will these interventions that we did early on the way up, how do they relate to, we hope, on the way down? In terms of temperature. So this is really very, I think, fundamentally thinking about how really changing how we think about the adaptation and mitigation innovation and strategies. Now, of course, when we look at those very smooth curves, right, it's misleading, because really and truly what's happening to the farming regions around the world, the production regions around the world, is increasing extreme events. And these are increasing in regard to frequency, intensity, and duration. Robert mentioned that had done early work on the detection and attribution of the impacts of climate changes. So we can't say, for each one of these, there has been work done for looking at what is the actual contribution to the climate change, to these extreme events. There's also weather patterns. For example, now we have El Nino this year. But just looking around the world, 2023 floods in China, of course, we all remember the really horrific flooding in Pakistan in 22. You experienced the heat waves in right there in the UK in 2022, and I saw that there was even some fires related to that heat in 2022, and in the US this is Ian, which abnormally hot water from climate change helped to strengthen those the damaging winds of Hurricane Ian, and caused over 375,000 acres of citrus that were affected. By the way, just in this year, East Africa floods in March through May in 2023, with over 2,000 people killed. The mortality was very high there, and of course northern France right across the channel even this month. So with back-to-back storms. So these are the challenges that are happening right now to the agricultural regions. But of course then we have the overlay of, we're coming out of COVID, which with all of those stresses to supply chains in particular, but also to the labor force, etc. And now we have, of course, conflict. So just highlighting, and I'm sure you're all aware, this has been very, very highly publicized, that the war's disruption to grain and fertilizer flows have prompted the worst food security crisis since at least 2008 financial recession. And this is the next statistics I think are very, very important, that now 345 million people are facing life-threatening food shortages. These are up from 145 in 2019. So we are going in the wrong direction in regard to hunger and hungry people around the world. So now let's dig into the weeds of how we study this. So I'm not going to go over this completely, but this is from the foundational paper for the IPCC AR6 assessment on food. Its projected yield changes relative to the baseline period 2001 to 2010, and this is without adaptation and with CO2 fertilization effects. And it's looking at maize, rice, soybean, and wheat. This is one of the issues. Basically, virtually all the work on climate change has focused on what we call the big four. And there are so many crops in terms of diversity as a strategy for resilience that we need to, I think, radically, and I'm going to show a project at the end which is actually doing this, we need to radically expand the crops that we're looking at, because we are putting literally all our eggs in these four baskets. So the top row is showing the yield change at mid-century. The colors are the different trajectories of greenhouse gases, with the red leading up to the highest. That's what's called the RCP 8.5. And this is current annual temperatures on the axes as we move to the right. And what we see is at the top row is at the mid-century, and the yield change at the end of the century is at the bottom. Now, it's really actually, so the way these studies are done is that it's an assessment report of the basically exercise of the research of the IPCC authors. And what they do is they take every single study that they can find, and they look at what the yield changes were at these different temperatures with and without adaptation. You see tremendous uncertainty bars, right? You do see some negative trends. You see some positive trends with soybeans, but definitely in maize, soybean, wheat, negative trends, especially with the higher temperatures. But look at the error bars, which are very, very high. So I'm going to give a critique of this, which is that when we look at CMIP, which is the Climate Model Intercomparison Project, which makes the multi-model projections of what the temperature and precipitation and climate changes are, which are really the foundation of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, that CMIP established a community standard for the IPCC Working Group 1, but the climate change impact scientists have struggled to find such standards, and in both the research design and reporting standards. So basically, over and over again, through assessment cycle after assessment cycle, this is the kind of assessment of wildly different studies that the impact scientists that the IPCC scientists then assess. So that's what this food chapter has compiled results for many assessment styles, wide variety, very different assumptions, very different modeling standards. And then they reduce everything to two numbers, one with and one without adaptation. They look at the CO2 effects as well, which is important. But it really is especially egregious given massive differences in adaptation strategies. And I know many people on this call work on adaptation strategies. So it's very different if you change a planting date or if you are changing your irrigation, or if you're changing your farming system. And all of these studies, it's like putting meta-analysis really, I think, way beyond it's what it's really called on to do. So one of the things specifically is that the reported uncertainties have been not all of the reported uncertainties have been included. So there's some real issues with how to do this. So clear standards on data aggregation need to be developed to better account for these kinds of issues. We need important meta information for each of the studies, such as the size of the model ensemble considered, what are the model evaluation standards, and the spatial extent of the estimate as well. And so this is AgMIP's advice to the IPCC. Maybe Jim Ski is listening, or we'll send this lecture to him. Should require fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible data standards for published results. We, as the impact community, not only for agriculture and food, but for all of the impact sectors, need to, I think, sharpen up our methods. So that's one of my main messages of this talk. So when we look at what in AR6, this is from the synthesis report. So what really was reported, the synthesis report authors reached in and pulled out the AgMIP results, because the AgMIP results have all those attributes. They are rigorous. They are protocol based. They have they are reproducible. All of the data standards, and this is what was selected, not this meta-analysis that I showed, which is just so hard to really bring any clear results. So I think for the sectors, now, of course, there's lots of work that's needed. For example, the great work that Nitya is doing on gender. And of course, this is not everything, but this is one key part of our field that we need to do so that all of our sectors, all of our maps can go to the decision makers who are deciding in Dubai, who are working on the framework, who are working on the Paris Agreement, what is going to happen to the agriculture in their country. And that's what this is. This is from the AgMIP Global Gridded Crop Model Initiative, great leadership by two young early career scientists, Jonas Jägermeier from Columbia University, Christoph Müller from PIC, Potsdam Institute for Klimat in Germany. And this is showing where the models agree, where they don't agree, and showing for the major temperature levels. So, by the way, so here we go. This is the video of Jonas and Christoph's and the 12 global gridded crop model groups, which all got together to give these very, very rigorous results. Notice they vary by region and commodity. This is wheat and the maize. Of course, maize much more severely affected, but now we can really understand and provide this evidence to the decision makers. We see in the higher latitudes, this is, by the way, without adaptation. So this is basically similar to the 4-degree C warming that I showed at the beginning. This is what, without adaptation, the world's farming regions and farmers are facing. Let's see, methods and tools. Okay, AgMIP, it's a global network. As I said, over 1,000. It convenes scientists and stakeholders. This is a very key element, that none of this is just purely scientist driven. We must get to the stakeholders, always engage early and often. And I'll speak more about that in a moment. To conduct multi-model assessments, we project the biophysical and economic impacts of practices, technologies, and incentives. So we work with policy a lot, testing the different outcomes for current and future climate conditions. The outcome, science-based for decision-making. And this is a very, very key part that we need for all of our work. So this just to prove to you that we are indeed a global community, and we invite everybody to join who is working in this area. You can see that the 8th Global in October was was virtual, but the first one in person, many in person global meetings. We do the individual crop teams, regional meetings. It's a wonderful, truly, I think, way that science is trending and what we need to do to solve the challenges of the day. Here's the 9th Global workshop, which was held at Columbia University in New York in June. That's AgMIP coordinating unit is there. You can see everybody's wearing a hat. The different fields within agriculture and food have different hats, color hats. So I'll just give you some examples. The agronomists are in green. The climate scientists are in blue. And guess what color the economists have? Gold. So if you join AgMIP, you get a hat. What's our mission? To provide science-based agricultural decision-making models and assessments of climate change to achieve local to global food security. So here's some examples of the methods and tools that I'm sure you all many of you are developing in your work. This is where I think the neat technology stuff is happening. So the first one is about a virtual lab, sometimes called digital twins. Here is one that we're working with the Iowa corn growers. I'm doing a local state one and then going up to global in terms of scales. So what really, now that we have the remote sensing, we have crop models, we have the observations in fields, we have the weather and climate, and we have machine learning, we're really now able to put it all together and do rapid analysis of climate scenarios and solutions, ability to work through what would have happened if types of studies. And this can really help to develop practical, cost-effective farm management solutions and really help to adapt to the changing weather, which is happening right now, and climatic conditions. I want to highlight in green on the left a couple of things on this slide. First of all, coming out of the adaptation futures in Montreal, very much I think a major message is that we need to all deepen our stakeholder engagement. You know, this whole modeling thing, everybody's like staring at their computers inside their computers, but we absolutely have to get out and make sure that what we do is really useful, usable, and used, right? I think where the field is trending now is co-leadership. So it's no longer that we have the scientists and we have the stakeholders, and it's kind of these two different groups. I think actually those two groups now come together and we have to co-lead the projects that we do together. I think this is what we need to actually develop those and actually bring them into implementation to the last mile for resilient. This is the machine learning. So we have a new group in AgMIP on machine learning with lots of young people. It's great. We just held the launch. There were over 50 people. Anybody who's interested in this, using the machine learning to improve the models. That's what we do. We put in the data and the models. We do the remote sensing machine learning algorithms, and then we compare the observed crop conditions to the simulated crop conditions, and we can really see much better where the models don't do a good job and where we have to improve them. So this is why we can't be doing assessments all the time. We've got to work on improving the models as well. This one is looking at now a larger farming region here in the Midwest. This is great work by Bruno Basso from Michigan State. The stars are the farmer collaborators. So we have the stakeholders right there. Even as we get more technological, we have to even be deeper with the farmers themselves, I think. And on the left is showing percent change in slow organic carbon. This is absolutely critical to for mitigation. from testing the effects from conventional tillage to no-till and cover crops. I'm sure some folks are working on this. Very challenging, very complex, depends on area, etc., soils, methods, longevity of practice, etc. But it's still very, very critical and important. On the right, though, is the cumulative nitrogen leach. We have to be careful of our regular pollution. Of course, with the nitrogen is a big one there. This is showing, by the way, that this is proving what I said about why the multi-model approach is so critical to AgMIP, because what this is showing is that for each one of the models doesn't do as good a job as the ensemble. The ensemble root mean square area error is lower than any of the individual models. This is on the test for the soil organic carbon. It's true for yield too. Now, moving up to this is farming system scale, but it's also linking to global as well, because we have global economic modelers, we have smallholder farming system modelers, and we actually and national, and also national modeling, national stakeholders. And now I believe another area that we have to work on is going across scales. So much work, great work is done right down in the field and farming and village scale, which is great and important. Of course, that's where it actually has to happen. But the farming system and then the national scale is so important for the policies in the countries. And then, of course, the global scale for the UNFCCC. So we've developed a real AgMIP, and I know Ivan Biot is in the audience, and he was an early supporter and developer of the AgMIP integrated assessment approach. It works with teams in country, in regions, stakeholder-driven farming systems, working with what's development pathways for example, the SDGs are part of it. Transdisciplinary, multi-scale, multi-model, and then what gets us, because of working with the economic models that Ivan was in the training session for, we get the distributional results, impacts on poverty. And then this also has gender too, that we can look to see the different labor issues of the women's role on the farm, since they in many places are the main farmers. Breaking down silos. How do we go? So here's the first one that I think we need to break down. Mitigation and adaptation. There's been huge amount of work done on emissions and mitigation models, huge amount of work on impacts and adaptation models. We now have protocols that bring them together. This is in Asia. This is on the ground in Asia, in Vietnam and India. And so what we do is this, so far we've been developing it in rice, with especially looking at, rather than having flooded rice for the entire season, to have alternate wetting and drying. And what we see is that we can see increases in yields from these practices, and roughly a roughly almost 40% decrease in methane emissions. And we do this then with the modeling. We do it with on the ground, but then we do it with the modeling with the climate change scenarios. So we're bringing all these things together, breaking down the silos between mitigation and adaptation, because it's all one system for the farmers. We had a project doing the same thing in Bangladesh, thanks to the great team there, with the Rice Institute, CIMMYT, and others. And we found strong reductions not only on water requirements for irrigation, but also the CH4 emissions. Now, I mentioned a project that I wanted to share with you, coming near to the end of what I want to share with you today, is a new project called Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, and it's being established in Africa. On the left is the observed climate trends. This is from the IPCC from 1980 to 2015. So this is, again, not something in the future. Climate change is happening already in Africa. But this project focuses on the underutilized traditional and indigenous crops, which we are calling in this project opportunity crops. The whole idea, and this is where the silo is breaking down the silos. First of all, it's breaking down the silos between the four major crops, the four big ones, and the big four, and then in really these amazing traditional and indigenous crops, and studying them to see which of them are both highly climate resilient and nutritious as well. So we're breaking down the silos between the breeders, the nutrition scientists, and the agronomists, as well as and then the climate scientists are helping to show, because this all has to work in the changing climate. So we're really thrilled to announce that we are developing 25 new crop models for 25 of these opportunity crops. And here they are. And I hope some people are on from Africa who know these crops, and we're the partners in this project are African Union, FAO, and the U.S. State Department. So it's very much it's going to be a large project and program in Africa to develop not only the breeding of these crops, but then also then bringing them to implementation, seeing which ones. Probably not all of them will make it, but some of them will, and to really help really develop the resilience the resilience in Africa with bringing in there's these more diverse crops that are both climate resilient and nutritious. This is what we call our crop modeling tree, because I want to make this point again, that we have to be developing our models, not just assessing. I have to say a little bit, I think we're getting a little bit taken over by assessments rather than being in our field of we gotta improve these models, we gotta improve the methods, we gotta do way more studies, then we can do assessments. It's just like that. AR6 is just over now. Everybody is like, oh, what are we doing for AR7? Of course we want to do good research, but we often, I think, tend to neglect model development. So I won't go through all this, but what we're doing is we start with a simple model, and then we need working with the breeders and the nutrition scientists to build up to be able to do multi-model, multi-scale, multidiscipline, process-based complex models with this wider range of crops. This is, I think, a key part to create the resilient systems. So just one quick show of sharing of results just coming out. So on the left is maize with yield projections for the 2050s, the percentage change. You can see that maize, as we were looking, remember in the animation and the global maps, that maize in Africa is in many places looking at pressure of really stresses and negative pressure on the yields. Fonio is a wonderful millet-related crop in West Africa. It's really delicious, fantastic. And look, what we see is when we test Fonio with the climate change projections, the same ones, it's doing better in West Africa than maize. So what we're doing in this project, what AgMIP is doing in this project is we're going to be, next time when I come to visit, I'm going to show you this map of Africa with the opportunity crops that are potentials all across Africa. And we look at not only the biophysical aspects, but the nutrition aspects, genetics, and this is comparing teff, the major crop in East Africa, especially Ethiopia, and seeing how they do in this whole set of how teff does in this whole set of adaptation indicators, including what's the scale of the breeding programs, the number of accessions, we're looking at this, the breeding, the nutrition, so breeding is in green, nutrition is in red, and then the climate change part and agronomy is in blue. So on to COP28. Here we go. Food system and food system emissions. This is very much, this food systems framing is what is being, the field has expanded beyond agriculture. We look at very much food systems, and we look at the emissions coming out of each one of these boxes of these activities. And of course, the food-related land use in regard to deforestation is still very high. We have the livestock production also very high, but we have the crop production, manure, fertilizer situation here. But then we also look at post-processing, diets and consumption, very, very important, waste disposal, food loss and waste. So every year, with the Conference of the Parties, the food systems is becoming more and more present at the COPs. So as folks are heading to Dubai just at the end of this month, very, very soon, there is a food systems pavilion. You probably maybe are participating this in the blue zone. There's a theme on December 10th, food, agriculture, and water. All food, there's a link for the all food and water events. And there is a VAX event at the US Center on December 3rd. So please do go along and learn more about it if you are going to be there. And with that, I want to thank you. It's been a tremendous honor for me to deliver the Norwich lecture this year for protocols and up-to-date events and news, and to join AgMIP, which I very much encourage anyone working in this field to do. Please visit the website. And I'm looking forward not just to the questions, but the discussion. I really want to hear, I'm going to pose a question to all of you. What do you think the AR7 should do, and where the directions it should take for food security, for resilient food systems? Thank you. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I think that was absolutely a fascinating
Tony, I
talk.
was sitting down relaxing.
Sorry. Thanks for an absolutely fascinating talk. I think taking us through so many issues and aspects, right from sort of stakeholders and co-learning and scales across scales, working with farmers, but also working at national and global levels. I think lots of food for thought. And thanks also for posing that question at the end. I would now like to hand over to my colleague, Peter Emmerich, to moderate the questions and comments, and then we'll come back. Maybe we can take a couple of questions and then Cynthia can respond, or we can see how it goes. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you so much. It was a really fantastic presentation, and I think many of us are buzzing with ideas following this. As we're waiting for a few more questions to come in, I wanted to ask, it's really exciting to hear about your work on underutilized crops, which are very close to our heart here at NISD. But I'm wondering, how are you modeling crop performance in areas where they're not currently grown, or where they might be not successfully growable at the moment? You showed the map for Fonio, but it only had that small area where the crop is currently grown. So how could you model the potential of these crops in areas where they're not currently cultivated?
Yes, shall I launch in? Really, to answer that question, there's a different kind of modeling, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. They're called agroecological zone analysis. And that takes all the data sets across, for example, Africa in this case, and it takes the soil databases, it takes the climate databases, and then it creates it's an expert system, really. It's a different kind of modeling than the dynamic process crop models. And then from that, you can geographically see So there's been some great work at the World Vegetable Institute, that part of the CG system, who've done that. So we can see there. So we utilize their great work to see how it could expand. And then you test it with so you first do climate zones, agroecological zones for the crops with the current climate, and then you test with the climate same scenarios, the same climate same scenarios that we use for the productivity. Because what you don't get with that kind of modeling is productivity.
Great, thank you very much. Ivan Bayut asks, how good are the AgMIP crop models at evaluating the impacts of extreme temperatures during different parts of the crop's growth cycle, such as early drought or late drought, or such things?
Yes. Okay, Ivan. Yes, Ivan always asks hard questions. So what the evidence with the crop models and the strength and rigor of the crop models rests on several things. One of which is that the models have been developed in a wide range of environments, so that they've been tested with high temperatures and drought conditions, and developed to do a good job, to be calibrated and validated in those extreme environments, as well as basically all the crop growing environments around the world. And so is particularly with the drought. So that's on the kind of high temperature part. On the drought part, because the crop in a different way, so they're different type of models than the agroecological zone models that we were just talking about. These models are actually growing the crop day by day in the computer. And so therefore, when there's an early drought, it's definitely reducing the growth in the early part of the season, and then or it drought in later part of the season as well. So all that being said, modelers and scientists, we can always improve. So I don't want to say they're perfect. And that's one reason why I'm saying we got to keep going on model development. And if there are any funders on, I think we have to balance, so out in the world, getting the projects out and implementation, but we've got to keep improving. That's why the I in AgMIP stands for not only intercomparison, but improvement. But thanks for the question, Ivan.
Thank you. A question from Azam Lashkari. You focused a lot on Africa, especially with some of the underutilized crops that you talked about. But in the larger worldwide maps that you showed, there were also some really significant crop losses for Middle East and Central Asia. Do you have a specific strategy for those world regions?
We just started about a year ago, within the last year or two, an AgMIP MENA team. So we have regional AgMIP teams, and we're very pleased. It's led out of Morocco. We are definitely have presence, and we're working together, because that's what AgMIP does. People work together, researchers and modelers work together. So we're working together with the modelers in the Middle East. Central Asia, not as much. We've done some work, but really not on more like ecosystems rather than agriculture. Although actually, wait a minute. I'm just remembering. We did recently, it was done through, we have a pillar on conservation and development, and it was really through the with funding from the UNDP. We just actually have completed a project, two projects, one in Uzbekistan and one in and that was focused on the Aral Sea region. We did crop modeling there. And so the answer is yes. it's and we also have worked in Afghanistan also quite a bit, but these are quite challenging places to work, but we very much want to continue researcher to researcher interactions.
Cool, thank you. A question from Natasha Grist is about how we can better integrate behaviors and livelihoods and choices by farmers and consumers into the socioeconomic models that AgMIP uses. To what extent are you doing that already, and to what extent do you think there's potential to improve that?
Yes. Well, I think I mentioned, but just want to share more about the economic modeling. So AgMIP from the beginning has always included the economists. And at the very first global workshop that was the founding of AgMIP in 2010, Mark Rosegran, who was the lead for the economic modeling for food and food security at IFPRI, that's the CG Policy Center. As he left the workshop, he said, "Don't worry, Cynthia, the economists are with you." So we always, first of all, Natasha, it's a really great and important question. And we really always have the economists with us because agriculture so we have to have the physical, we have to have the climate scientists, we have to have the biophysical for the crops. I didn't focus on livestock, but we have livestock modelers with us. So I think someone mentioned before the lecture working with Mario Herrero, who is on the executive committee of AgMIP. And it's also a livelihood. And if you don't pay attention to the livelihoods, what's it all for, really? So we have wonderful global team, IFPRI, PIC, GTAP. You may be familiar with these acronyms of the global econ modelers, and they're also contributing to Eat Lancet 2.0. But we also have a wonderful team of regional economists. And that's led by Roberto Valdivia and John Antle. And their model, which is called the TOA, trade-off analysis model, is able then to look at the choices between, like looking at, for example, the and Roberto and the colleagues in Ghana are working on this right now for VAX, to look at adoption rates for the indigenous crops, and to see, and it's possible there also to put in coefficients for consumer choice. But this clearly, there needs to be, again, way more. So we can get all the evidence base and develop these right with the breeders and the nutrition scientists, and the information from the social side, but then really how to get it, like that last mile challenge of really getting them going is so we're going to be holding a workshop just even in a couple of weeks, and with all the partners in the project, and really roll up sleeves to say, okay, how do we get there? So Natasha, it's really a right-on question.
Great, thank you very much. Next, I'm fusing two questions, one from Oliver Springett-Baginski and another from Rangalakshmi, which is, what do you think are the top priorities for emissions mitigation from the agricultural sector, and how can that be balanced with the mitigation, with the adaptation challenge, especially faced by smallholder farmers?
This is a really good question, and this is really why we started MACB, because we had, there's like the folks who work on the mitigation side, folks who work on the adaptation side, but look at rice, it's all one system. You can't really think about, and this brings in very much sustainability, right? Because it's not, we have for the Bangladesh work, we had a wonderful project. It was funded by the Australia development, ag development research funding. And they said, look, you know, it can't just be mitigation and adaptation, smallholder farming systems, right? It can't just be mitigation, you know, absolutely not in those countries. And that the value proposition has to be that it's better for the farmers' livelihoods and better for food security for the country. So when we look to evaluate the mitigation and adaptation, I think it's really important that we have that lens on. And so we can say, look, this alternate wetting and drying looks good, right? I would say for rice, that's definitely for the methane from rice. There's definitely ways that we can do that, and it helps on the water use if there are more early or late droughts, you know, or coming on in those in rice growing regions. That can be, if we reduce water use, that can help as well. So but that being said, look, there's the deforestation. I mean, when you look at the big numbers on the emissions, the deforestation for clearing of land for agriculture is still high. It's coming down. There's been a lot of progress in that. And we work with FAO, Francesco Tubiello, for the food system emissions. And this is something that we are also working on. We think that the IPCC task force on inventories should really provide more guidance to countries on how they can decide. Because again, anything with agriculture, it's the sector very, very close to the country's hearts. And, you know, they need all the tools that they have, that they can possibly, that they need, so that they can be making their decisions for their nationally determined contributions. That being said, we have the whole beef issue, you know, it's like, you know, big one in the room, but again, very complex. I think just we're always very, very careful when we talk about the emissions and food choices, food environments, farming systems, all of that, you know, there was such an enormous spectrum across the world in regard to beef consumption. So I think that we have to just be very careful about. So I hope that I gave some guidance to the question.
Thank you very much. As a perhaps follow-on to this question from Nitya, which is, how open have policymakers been to your models in terms of initiating policy change?
Yes. So during COVID, with the CLARE, it was a fast track CLARE project. You may be familiar with CLARE, and working with IDRC in Canada. We did a project, Ghana, Senegal, and Zimbabwe with the teams there, all women led, by the way. And they engaged. Part of it was, so we also, not only do we have our economists, modelers, we also have our social scientists with us to help us engage with stakeholders really rigorously, because, you know, everybody can say there's so much hand waving, get with stakeholders, co-generate, you know, all these terms, right? But what we've found is really the way to go, I guess, for the AgMIP projects, is to really bring onto the teams experts in those areas. And so then we developed surveys. First of all, first we have baseline interviews, developing the relationships, then surveys, and then workshops, you know, really following on. And one of the findings from that fast track CLARE project was that this is with the national stakeholders, we were aiming at national stakeholders, is that they need training capacity. Everybody needs capacity building as well. You know how there's all capacity building for the scientists, like on the research side, but guess what? The policymakers need it too, so that they can learn how to use, you know, take evidence base and bring it into the policies. But that being said, they were very interested. They really liked it. See, because you see, when they have evidence, then they can say, this is why we're making a decision. Otherwise, it's, you know, of course, it's science. And we all know science is not the only criterion that goes into the decision making, but it certainly can help them. And I would say they recognize it. So, but I still think I think that would be a really interesting, really interesting research. How would we design research and it's action research to help policymakers use evidence-based science in their policymaking, and go all the way to adaptation effectiveness, by the way. So this is just another key topic, which I couldn't put everything in, but the World Adaptation Science Program is standing up 3 core projects to, again, engage with wider communities, you know, especially in the South, so we can do research together, not just assess together. That's one of my main messages. And the 3 are the global goal on adaptation. These are going to all be presented at COP. Global goal on adaptation, loss and damage, of course, which of course is very, very hot research topic now. But adaptation effectiveness, that's the one that we're working on. It's like we do these, we implement, now they're beginning to be implemented, right, with action research. How do we actually develop the metrics for the adaptation effectiveness? I think that will also help the policymakers very, very much.
Great, thank you. Now, putting together 2 questions from Steph Shankland and Samuel Kirby. With regard to the 25 opportunity crops that you talked about, how do you see this multi-analysis modeling approach that you've talked about, breaking down silos at the international level when these crops are so different from each other, and climate modeling alone might not show how one of them might contribute to nutritional security, and one of them might contribute to economic security, and one of them might give you the best resilience spectrum. So how do you see this coming together?
Yes, thank you. So thanks, because it gives an opportunity to talk a little bit more about VAX. And by the way, VAX, again, if people are interested, please be in touch. I think they're going to be what we're hoping very much is forming, a multi-year program really in Africa, with especially African participants. So if folks are on, but also anyone who's interested. So here are the silos that really this project is bringing together. I mentioned this, but I want to talk a little bit more about it. So there may be some crop breeders on the call, and which is, so important and so fundamental. Oh, by the way, this project is being led by, it is the brainchild of Dr. Carrie Fowler, who is the founder of the Svalbard seed repository in Norway. So you can, if you know about that, you can see how this could be his next project of wanting to really develop and work and spread and the opportunity crops. It's kind of a wonderful follow-on to Svalbard. So first, crop breeders. Wonderful work, absolutely fundamental, but it's quite it's a community or a tribe, maybe. I sometimes call them tribes. It's a tribe. I think crop breeders are a tribe. And there are, like, so for example, tribes collecting, you collect a lot of data, but they're not the data that are really needed for the crop models. And if we don't have the crop models, we can't really see how the climate scenarios are going to affect the crops. So we're in this, so that's how we're really working on developing the integrated relationships between these 2 communities, so that the breeders, when they do their experiments, can really collect the data. And by the way, we also, we can send people, right? We can send our graduate students, right, to help. And then, so we create models right from the beginning, right? not wait, not wait. So that's then on the nutrition side, again, it's a nutrition science, amazing group of scientists, but really there has not been an interaction with the agronomists and the crop modeling. And now it's very important, because high CO2, you may be all aware of this, is that the high carbon dioxide has a detrimental effect on protein content and micronutrients. Because the carbohydrates are doing better with the high CO2, but the other nutrients don't catch up. So we are now working with them to actually embed these nutrition aspects into the models as well. So it's this kind of deep work, sometimes I call it radical collaboration, that I think is needed. Where are these gaps? Where is it hard to talk to each other? Where are there the tribes, right? And let's see what we can do to break down those silos and, make an intertribal council.
Excellent. Following on from this, there's a question from Jess Chapman on how this data science-based knowledge and decision making can be integrated with indigenous forms of decision making and management of agricultural systems and stewardship of those systems.
Wonderful. Yes. So thank you for this very, very important question. And I would say that this is your question, it brings up another major theme of Adaptation Futures 2023. And we'll be continuing in the next one in 2025, which is going to be in New Zealand. This one was in Montreal, Canada. Just as we're bringing together, I was saying, those different groups of the scientists, we need to do a tremendous amount of, I think, listening. I think that's really where we all are, I think. Just listening. And learning, right? Listening and learning. We did a project with this was on the detection and attribution work that Robert mentioned that I did for the IPCC, and we did a project with representatives from tribes, members of tribal nations, all primarily in the high latitudes. So there were Inuit, and then from Siberia, from Canada, from those are the Western countries, but from those tribal lands. And what we then developed was we did write a paper that came out of it, but it was very much listening. And what we came up with something we called side-by-side, a side-by-side approach. And so this was a lot about what were the narratives of the observed changes due to climate. So it's like observed climate impacts from the indigenous peoples and from the Western scientists getting in and saying what changes have happened, and measuring all that, and doing all statistics and things like that. And so we just published a paper. It's in Bioscience, and it's called we called it the side-by-side approach, and that's where I think we are and very much now with the VAX project as well.
Thank you. I've got another question from Rangalakshmi asking about agroecological farming principles that are now spoken about a lot in the context of resilience. And how do you see these being these could be brought into the modeling approach as alternatives or as variations to the whole farming system?
Yeah. These are great questions. I knew they were going to be really good questions. Yeah, very important. We need, I think, to do research on those agroecological principles. There, as you know, some of these things are quite contested, and the definitions of, what is regenerative agriculture, there's definitional issues, et cetera. But at the same time, these are really important principles. We know that the soils are degraded, and that there needs to be where they need to be regenerated. But as from the science side, I think, and this is actually what we're doing, which I'll tell about a little bit about in a moment, but I think we need to roll up sleeves, work with the folks who are really working with those principles, and do measurements, and also very much long-term measurements. I think it's not only measurements, just one-offs, right? But it's like those things, like soils, take a long time to develop and to regenerate. And so I think having a long-term perspective on those principles is very important. So just quick sharing of near Columbia University, it's about 30 miles away. There's a wonderful agroecological center called Farm and Food Center. It's called Stone Barns Food Center for Agroecosystems and Food. And we're establishing a relationship with the Columbia Climate School to bring students, bring professors to bring students, and to work there on these kinds of experiments, and to make models of them. So, because if you don't, you really need the models also to be able to see what's happening at scale, and then also to see how things can scale up. And what I say to them all the time is, I always bring up the example of Rothamsted, which is the premier long-term agroecological research station. And I say we need to have Stone Barns be the Rothamsted of the Northeast US.
Wonderful. One more question from Satish Kumar, who is working on post-harvest technologies on rice. Can you bring post-harvest losses into the modeling approach, and what kind of collaborations would be possible with organizations that are focused on this?
We would love to talk about how we could do that. Right now, post-harvest would just be, if it's the losses, it would just be coefficients, really. It would be, adding on something. But there's really a lot of work now is getting going. It's much more now on supply chains and all these other aspects, which our crop models really don't do. So, but we're interested in modeling all different parts. I showed all those boxes of the unified food system approach, which was developed originally. There's a wonderful one in the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land. Wonderful co-authors helped make that vision of it, that conceptualization of it. So please be in touch. We would love to do something and develop collaborations, especially because food loss and waste. We were talking before about the emissions, and clearly work on reducing food loss. The post-harvest is like the food loss is, and then the food waste more on the consumption side is very important on the mitigation side.
Thank you. And we've got time for just one more question from Nitya Rao on how far can the models for opportunity crops that you've developed under VAX be applied to similar agroecological zones in Asia? So this would be with the idea of moving crops really long distances and broadening the spectrum of opportunities.
So what Carrie Fowler says is, we're starting in Africa, but the vision is really, see, in the name, it doesn't actually say Africa. And so the vision is very much to take and do it, not necessarily take these crops, but see if some of them would go into other geographies, but also utilize the same approach, I think. What are the indigenous crops in Asia, of which I know, I mean, there were hundreds. They gave us the initial list. It was like 300 to 500. I can't remember, but it was hundreds. And then we went through this whole process with the breeders and the nutrition and the climate scientists and us to like hone down to those 25. And by the way, I want to just make one more point about VAX, which it was on the slide, but I just want to emphasize that the other part of it, and breaking down the silo of only looking at the cereals and grains, but that's why it was grouped on the slide, because there are the legumes, there are the fruits, there are the vegetables, there are the roots and tubers. You see that we're breaking out of the silo of only looking at the grains, which has been so much the focus. So anyway, let's talk. Let's definitely talk about Asia. And I know that Carrie Fowler would love to hear it.
Thank you very much. I'll be back to Nitya.
Thanks so much, Peter. And thanks to everybody for, I think, really interesting, fascinating questions, and Cynthia for your responses and engagement. I think there are several issues, I think, which have really touched me myself from today's talk. One is, of course, this whole emphasis on, I think, co-learning rather than science working on its own, but also co-learning, co-developing, and working across stakeholders. I think scientists, researchers, policymakers, but also farmers. I think that was really an interesting point, Cynthia, that you made, that we can't forget the farmers and the fields. I think that has to be the basic level from which we keep pulling in data with change. It was absolutely fascinating to hear the account of this opportunity crops. I think because you're quite right in that there has been this whole transition, even in terms of, people's health and consumption and nutrition. And, probably in the 50s and the 60s, when hunger was the problem and we needed to focus on cereals, but it's very much shifted to sort of malnutrition and all forms of malnutrition, and the need for protein and micronutrients as well, very importantly. And I think this is really, to me, very exciting because, coming from South Asia, from India, I think this was the year of the millets. But actually, to make the real shift in terms of both production and consumption, and get it equitably distributed across different population groups, I think still remains a challenge. So I think some of the scientific work can be really very helpful in that respect. And I think, of course, your point about policymakers, I mean, I do appreciate your optimism on policymakers and policy change. But of course, I think this is going to be a hard struggle for all of us, but something we need to keep doing and keep at. I think your idea of an action research was excellent. So thanks very much, Cynthia, for really bringing to light such a diverse set of issues, from policy to research to models to methodology. We really appreciate it, and we hope to keep forward the discussion. I think to everybody else, please do register on our website for our newsletter and information about future events. We would really love to have you involved and participate. I think one of our vision and motto is also very much sort of bottom-up learning, working with stakeholders, and so on. So thanks everybody very much, and we'll close this session. Thank you very much, Cynthia.
Thank you very much to the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development, Nitya. Peter, great question monitoring and presenting. Great to see some old colleagues and new. And thanks very much again to the Institute for inviting me to give the lecture. I really enjoyed it. I'm honored.
Thank you. Thank you. And we hope we'll see you also sometime here soon.
In person, yes.
Thank you.